The DNA evidence against Bryan Kohberger is explained by the most recent district attorney filing. A Mother of the Year contestant. What does a child predator look like? Well, we've got a picture for you. And then finally, our dumb criminal of the day. Let's talk about it. Good day, everyone. My name is Scott Reich, and this is Crime Talk. Before we get to the docket, you know the drill. Subscribe if you haven't, like if you do, leave me a comment, hit that little bell, and remember, you can listen to us anytime on any of your favorite podcasting apps. Now, let's support the people that support Crime Talk. Who's that? Go to crimetalksearch.com. When you sign up for that background subscription service, you can do a background search on as many people as you desire here in the United States. And that report is literally going to be generated while you wait, and it's going to provide information as to whether they have a criminal background, whether they have debts, whether they have liens against them. Are they being honest with you? Do they have to be on one of those public registries? Listen, whether it's new people coming into your life, whether your kids, check out the kids' parents. See if they're going to be a good influence. Are they telling you the truth? crimetalksearch.com. Let's go ahead and open the record for June 21st, 2023. And first on the docket, Bryan Kohberger. The district attorney has outlined their evidence as it relates to the DNA for Bryan Kohberger. Why? They're trying to keep the genealogical information secret. And in this case, frankly, I understand why this should probably be sealed. These people had no interest in being involved in this case, and well, here it is. But it explains a lot about the process in which the investigators went through that ultimately led to Kohberger. Now, I could summarize this for you in 30 seconds, but I think this is worth reading. Yes, it's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's the big picture. And we're big on facts, and we're like going to these source documents to actually see what's taking place. So, although it's a little long, I think it's worth reading. I may skip through some of the parts, but I think we're going to hit the good stuff. So this is the motion for a protective order filed by the district attorney. And it's rather detailed, and I'm surprised they released it in light of everything that's been sealed thus far. It's kind of like the district attorney was shooting a shot across the bow of the defense saying, "We gotcha." So here it goes. Motion for protective order comes now. The state of Idaho, by and through their attorneys, and hereby respectfully moves this court for a protective order for information related to investigative genetic genealogy. This case arises from a quadruple homicide. Law enforcement found the DNA of a potential suspect at the crime scene, and the FBI submitted the DNA to one or more publicly available genetic genealogy services to determine potential relatives of the suspect. The FBI then used common genealogical techniques to develop a family tree leading to defendant. The state seeks to protect from disclosure the names and personal information of the hundreds of innocent relatives on the family tree, the names of the publicly available genetic genealogy services used, and certain other information described below. The disclosure of this information is not required by Rule 16 and should be protected from disclosure for good cause. Here we go. The factual background. On November 13th, 2022, law enforcement found the bodies of Madison Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zaina Kernodle, and Etha Chapin at 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho. All four victims died from apparent knife wounds. Law enforcement found a K-bar knife sheath on a bed next to the bodies of Madison and Kaylee. The sheath was face down and partially under both Madison's body and the comforter on the bed. Law enforcement seized the K-bar knife sheath pursuant to a search warrant. The Idaho State Police Lab in Meridian, Idaho located DNA in the K-bar sheath, and the ISP laboratory determined the DNA came from a single source, and that source was male. Once law enforcement had single source DNA from the K-bar sheath, they conducted what is called a short tandem repeat, STR, analysis. STR DNA analysis involves looking at 20 regions within human DNA and allows law enforcement to make a direct comparison between two STR DNA profiles. Law enforcement submitted the STR DNA profile obtained from the K-bar sheath to the Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS, a database of STR-DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and crime scene evidence to identify the source of the DNA. No match was found. Unable to find a match using STR-DNA analysis, law enforcement decided to use investigative genetic genealogy to find a lead. Genetic genealogy allows individuals to trace their lineage or connect with unknown family members using DNA. Typically, it involves sending a DNA sample, such as a tube of saliva, to a genetic genealogy service like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. The genetic genealogy service then creates a single nucleoid polymorphism SNP profile to use for genealogical purposes. A SNP profile is different than an STR-DNA profile and is used more often for genealogical purposes. And then there's a footnote. While an STR-DNA analysis involves looking at 20 regions within the human DNA, an SNP profile contains about 650,000 of the human genome's 3.3 billion nucleotides. The genetic genealogy service then uses an algorithm to compare the user's NSP profile to NSP profile submitted to the genealogical service by other users to determine ancestry and potential relatives. The genetic genealogy service shares with the user a list of potential relatives and, depending on the specific genetic genealogy service, personally identifying information of those individuals, like the names, email addresses, and the amount of DNA the user shares with the potential relatives. The user does not receive any genetic information pertaining to other database users. The same process used frequently by members of the public can be used by law enforcement as part of their investigative technique, a technique referred to as investigative genetic genealogy, or IGG. Once a publicly available genetic genealogy service shows law enforcement potential relatives of the suspects, law enforcement applies traditional investigative and genealogical methods to build a family tree in an effort to follow the tree to the suspect or a close relative of the suspect. Family trees can be used to narrow down a potential suspect based on factors such as age, gender, opportunity, known physical characteristics of the suspects, etc. In this case, investigators used IGG to begin the process of developing a lead to the individual who left DNA on the Kohber knife sheath. The Idaho State Police utilized a private laboratory to develop a SNP profile from the DNA on the Kohber sheath. The private laboratory started using genetic genealogy to develop a family tree, but after law enforcement decided the FBI would take over, the private laboratory ceased its efforts and sent the NSP profile to the FBI. Another footnote. For ease of reference, this motion focuses on the FBI's IGG efforts, and the state is also seeking to protect the partial family tree created by the private lab, and it should be protected for the same reasons the FBI's IGG efforts should be protected. The FBI uploaded the NSP profile to one or more publicly available genetic genealogy services to identify possible family members of the suspect based on shared genetic data. The FBI could then view the genetic genealogy services portal information regarding potential relatives of the suspect who left DNA on the Kohber knife sheath. Based on information the FBI could see in the genetic genealogy service portal, the FBI went to work building family trees of the genetics relatives of the suspect DNA left at the crime scene in an attempt to identify the contributor of the unknown DNA. The FBI built the family tree using the same tools and methods used by members of the public who wish to learn more about their ancestors. For example, the FBI consulted social media, viewed vital records such as birth and death certificates, and viewed other information already contained in the user portal for the genetic genealogy service, including unverified information submitted by other users of the genetic genealogy service. The FBI also consulted subscription-based databases available to law enforcement for information on individual people. And the product of the genealogy conducted by the FBI was a family tree that contained the name, birth date, and death date, if applicable, of hundreds of relatives, as well as their familial connections between each other and the suspect, Bryan C. Kohberger. The FBI then sent to local law enforcement a tip to investigate defendant. The IGG process pointed law enforcement toward defendant, but it did not provide law enforcement with substantive evidence of guilt. The FBI did not, for example, conduct a direct comparison between the NSP profile from the Kohber sheath and defendant's NSP profile. That type of direct comparison required the more traditional STR DNA analysis, which was conducted by the Idaho State Police, not the FBI. And prior to the FBI's IGG efforts, the ISP laboratory developed the traditional STR DNA profile from the DNA found on the Kohber sheath, and after identification of the defendant, law enforcement recovered trash from the home of defendant's parents, and ISP laboratory did STR DNA analysis of items from the trash for comparison to the unknown crime scene DNA. The comparison indicated the DNA found on the trash belonged to the biological father of the individual who left the DNA on the Kohber sheath. Pursuant to a search warrant, law enforcement then collected DNA from defendant via a buccal swab. A traditional STR DNA comparison was done between the STR profile found on the Kohber sheath and defendant's DNA. The comparison showed a statistical match. Specifically, the STR profile is at least 5.37 octillion times more likely to be seen if defendant is the source than if an unrelated individually randomly selected from the general population is the source. The genealogy conducted by the FBI resulted in a lead that pointed law enforcement to defendant, but it did not result in the creation of many documents or records. Much of the information relied on by the FBI was only viewed through the user portal in the publicly available Genetic Genealogy Service and other investigative databases. The FBI did not download or create copies of those records. Once defendant was in custody, the FBI removed the NSP profile from the Genetic Genealogy Service pursuant to the United States Department of Justice Interim Policy for Forensic Genetic Genealogy DNA Analysis and Searching, their DOJ policy. This means the FBI no longer had access to view much of the information it used to create the family tree and cannot view it again without resubmitting the NSP profile to the Genetic Genealogy Service. To the state's knowledge, the only record that reflects the FBI's effort to create defendant's family tree is the family tree itself. Notes jotted down by the FBI agents as they constructed the family tree, and any records created to document the removal of the NSP profile from the Genetic Genealogy Service pursuant to the DOJ policy. The state has not seen, nor does the state possess, these records or copies of these records. Information related to the use of the IGG in this case. Idaho Criminal Rule 16 governs discovery in criminal proceedings, but it is not a free-for-all. The rule contemplates the exchange of discrete categories of information between the state and the defense. As relevant here, the rule contemplates the state will provide 3 discrete categories of information: any material or information that would tend to negate the guilt of the accused, see ICR 16A, any documents or objects that are material to the preparation of the defense, intended for the use by the prosecutor as evidence at trial, or were obtained from the defendant or belong to the defendant, and for reports of scientific tests or experiments. If a defendant believes he should receive information that does not fall with one of these discrete Rule 16 categories, the rule allows the defendant to seek an order from the court for information where the defendant can show substantial need for the information in the preparation of this case. Here, defendant served on the state a request for discovery that calls for the IGG information, even though the IGG information falls outside of Rule 16 without first obtaining an order from the court. The state now seeks, and the court should enter an order protecting the information related to the use of the IGG in this case. Specifically, the state seeks to protect the following information: the raw data related to the NSP profile and the underlying laboratory documentation related to the development of the profile, such as chain of custody forms, laboratory standard operating procedures, analysis notes, etc. All information related to IGG efforts in creating a family tree and identifying defendants' potential relatives, including the identities of the Genetic Genealogy Service and the personally identified information of defendants' relatives. The state does not seek to protect or has or will disclose the following information: a genotype kit report from the private lab utilized by the Idaho State Police, which documents the DNA test was performed. Information related to the STR DNA analysis conducted using the DNA recovered from the K-bar sheath and the DNA recovered from the defendant's parents' trash. And information related to the STR DNA analysis conducted using the DNA recovered from the K-bar knife sheath and the DNA recovered from the defendant's via a buccal swab. The court should grant an order protecting the IgG information in this case because the information does not fit any of the discrete categories listed in Rule 16, and good cause exists for the need to protect the privacy of the defendant's relatives. And then the prosecutor goes through a bunch of cases trying to explain why they are correct. We're going to just jump to the end from there. I think you get the picture. Based on the above, the state respectfully prays for the court to enter an order protecting the IgG information from disclosure as it falls outside the purview of Rule 16. In the alternative, if the defense can establish the IgG information is in fact relevant, the state asks this court to conduct the requisite in-camera hearing for the state to present information related to the IgG information and enter a protective order. Now, what is really significant of this? Now, we knew the DNA evidence was found. We knew that it had been tested, and that is the crux of their case. I think what we really ought to be aware of here is that when you submit your DNA for your genealogical service, you probably want to use one that doesn't give a portal for law enforcement to do their comparison. Certainly you can do what you want, but it just shows you another area where kind of the government is there. It's good law enforcement, I guess. Privacy interests, definitely, indeed. But you just got to be careful out there, ladies and gentlemen, giving the world your DNA, for goodness sakes. You never know where it could lead. Could lead to somebody being criminally charged. Now, certainly that's a good thing if we get the right guy. But what if it's the wrong guy? What if they don't get the family tree absolutely correct? Just something to think about. But I think it's pretty clear, big numbers as it relates to the fact that the odds of it being someone other than Bryan Kohberger's DNA are about slim to none. And what does that really mean? His defense attorneys have got a difficult time explaining how his DNA got on that sheath that was found either under or near two of the deceased in that apartment. Mr. Kohberger, you've certainly given your attorneys a tough hill to climb. Next on the docket, another Mother of the Year contestant. And yes, for all those people that take everything so literal, that's sarcasm. All right? So a mother's been charged with murder after she allegedly left her 16-month-old daughter alone for more than a week while she went on vacation. Christelle Candelario reportedly told police she went to Puerto Rico and then Detroit, and she left home on June 8th and returned on June 16th. And when she did return home, guess what? She found that her child was unresponsive. Investigators allege that the little girl was extremely dehydrated, and the baby's play bin packed with soiled blankets and bottom liner saturated with urine and feces. Apparently, the baby's grandmother usually cared for the baby pursuant to conversations with the neighbors. Now, Ms. Candelario was arraigned on Tuesday and given a $1 million bond. A pretrial hearing is set for June 28th. What do you say? What do you say about that? I mean, unless your defense is, hey, grandma was going to take care of the kid and you go on vacation for 2 weeks and then your child is dead? Yep, that's child abuse. Child abuse resulting in death. Ms. Candelario, not too smart on your part. Next, what does a child predator look like? Well, here you go. We got a picture of one. This is a disgraced producer accused of child sex abuse, and he got to hear from the young victims that says that, well, she will never trust anyone again, and he was sentenced to 19 years behind bars. And guess what? this guy worked as a senior producer at CNN for 8 years, following various stints at ABC, Fox News, and CBS. So who is this child predator? His name is John Griffin, and he was ordered to serve 19 years in prison and 15 years of supervised release, that's like parole, when he gets out of prison. Now, Mr. Griffin from Stamford, Connecticut, pled guilty in December to using interstate commerce for the enticement of a minor. We did a complete video on this guy. And this guy had all the privileges of life. He went to Princeton University, and he let the judge know that he acted without considering the consequences because people were no longer people. They became screen names. Now, Griffin, a father of 3, convinced a woman he met online to bring her 9-year-old daughter to his little multi-million-dollar home, ski chalet, where he molested the child, as the prosecutors alleged. He also paid a mother $3,000 in July of 2020 to fly from Nevada to Boston, where he picked them up in his car and drove them to his house and directed the girl to engage in various acts. The girl's mother, Heather Carricker, has also been charged with child abuse and child sexual assault charges. And the court documents state that they accused him of persuading women that he met online that a woman wasn't a woman, regardless of her age, and that she should be the one to sexually train their young daughters. Okay, that's just not normal, ladies and gentlemen. Not normal. So I don't know if you're meeting a guy who's talking like that or you're going along with it. That's just not normal. And if you're meeting some guy online or girl, for that matter, that's why you need to go to CrimeTalkSearch.com to avoid the Griffins of the world. That's right. Mr. Griffin looks like a good guy, successful guy. Yeah, he just got a thing for young children. Well, Mr. Griffin also attempted to entice 2 minors into sexual activities using Kik and Google Hangout. So be careful what your children are doing. Grab their phone every now and then. Take a look at it. See what's going on. And finally, our dumb criminal of the day. Police responded to a theft call Monday afternoon. Police confronted a guy by the name of David Romero. He was sitting in his car outside of a Target in Florida. And ultimately, the police made contact with him and they arrest him. While they're handcuffing Mr. Romero, he's being placed in the rear of the police car. A small pink vibrator fell from his pants. This item was basically revealed to be stolen from Target. A subsequent search of Mr. Romero's truck turned up an assortment of other stolen goods, including some condoms, some Hello Cake lubricant, and a Climax control spray. Now, the Target loss prevention officer told the police that Mr. Romero hid the items in a piece of shapewear that he did not scan at the self-checkout line. When asked about the Target merchandise found in his truck, Mr. Romero apparently claimed that, well, these items were in his vehicle for days. And he further stated that he was going to use those items today with his wife because he was working all day yesterday and he couldn't celebrate Father's Day with her. Well, Mr. Romero, who lived about 8 miles from the Target store, was charged with misdemeanor theft for swiping goods totaling $187.23. And he also has 2 other pending theft cases, which involve 5 separate shoplifting incidents in the Palm Coast area. Well, what can we learn from this, Mr. Romero? Don't take other people's things. It's called theft. It's called karma. And then you're going to have various toys falling out. I think the biggest thing that's shocking about this story is I didn't know Target even sold this stuff. Go figure. Anyway, Mr. Romero, you are our dumb criminal of the day. Keep your hands off of other people's things. All right, thanks for watching. Have a great day. We'll see you next time on Crime Talk.